I won't approach this gently either. Some things don't deserve a softened entrance. Some truths lose their shape the moment they're wrapped in caution. And whatever this is between us, it has already moved too far beyond politeness, too far beyond careful language, too far beyond the kind of distance people use when they're afraid to admit something matters. So I'll say it plainly. You became significant before I gave you permission to. That is not a sentence I expected to ever form. I've always believed that closeness should be visible while it's happening. It should announce itself through time, through repetition, through shared moments that slowly stack until meaning becomes undeniable. There should be signs, steps, a sequence that makes the outcome understandable. That's how most things work. This didn't. There was no timeline I could point to, no obvious shift, no single moment where I could say, this is where everything changed. Instead, it happened quietly. So quietly that by the time I noticed it, it had already rooted itself deeper than things that took years. That's what unsettled me first. Not you, not the connection, the speed at which something so subtle became structural, because temporary things usually feel loud, they arrive dramatically, they demand attention, they create intensity that burns bright enough to be mistaken for permanence. This was the opposite. It was calm, measured, almost invisible, and yet somehow more powerful than anything that ever arrived with noise. You didn't force your way into my thoughts. You rearranged them without touching anything. You didn't demand presence. You became part of the atmosphere of my mind. That distinction matters. There are people who occupy attention for a moment. There are people who create distraction. There are people who stir emotions strongly enough to feel unforgettable until time proves otherwise. And then there are rare people who alter the internal architecture. They don't just become memorable, they become relevant to how you think. That's where you exist now, not as a passing thought, not as a fixation, not even as someone I simply care about. You exist as reference, as orientation, as a quiet point my mind measures against without asking me first. I notice it in ways that would sound insignificant to anyone else. A sentence forms and I know how you would hear it. A silence appears and I know whether you would leave it untouched or fill it. Something confusing happens and I instinctively imagine how your perspective would cut through it. That kind of presence is difficult to explain because it isn't dramatic enough for people to understand immediately. But it is profound because it means you are no longer separate from certain parts of my processes. And I don't integrate people easily. Most remain external. No matter how much they know, no matter how long they stay, they remain outside the private mechanics of how I interpret life. I can care for people deeply and still keep that internal space untouched. That used to feel permanent. Then you happened. And now I'm forced to admit something I resisted for longer than I should have. You reached a place in me that was never designed for visitors. Not because I locked it away out of fear, because I protected it out of precision. There's a difference. Fear hides because it expects harm. Precision hides because it values accuracy. I've seen too many people misunderstand what they touch. Too many people mistake proximity for comprehension. Too many people think affection qualifies them to define someone else. So I learned to keep the most important parts untranslated, safer that way, cleaner, more intact. But you never approached me with that usual hunger people carry. You didn't need to own what you understood. You didn't rush to name it. You didn't try to improve it, fix it, reshape it, or make it easier to hold. You simply recognized it. That changed everything. Recognition without possession is rare. Most people want to claim whatever they understand. They turn it into identity, leverage, intimacy, certainty. You didn't. You let understanding remain respectful. You let depth remain free. And because of that, I stopped guarding as hard as I normally would. Not deliberately. I didn't make a decision one day to lower anything. It happened the way dawn happens, too. Gradually to notice until the room is full of light. I began speaking more directly. I began leaving thoughts unfinished because I knew you would understand where they were going. I began allowing silence because I trusted it would not be mistaken for absence. You understand how unusual that is? Most people panic in silence. They treat quiet like a threat. They rush to fill it with explanations, jokes, reassurance, noise, anything to avoid feeling the weight of what isn't being said. You don't do that. It's not a nut to sign. We got a nut to sign, and we got a nut. You let silence remain intelligent. You let pauses carry meaning. You seem to know that not everything valuable arrives in words. That alone separated you from almost everyone else, but it wasn't only that. It was the precision of your perception. There were moments you noticed things I had not consciously admitted to myself yet. Not because you interrogated me, not because you pried, because you were paying attention in the rare way that includes restraint. You saw patterns without trying to control them. You noticed contradictions without weaponizing them. You understood tone, timing, absence, shifts in rhythm. You read what was present rather than inventing what was missing. That kind of seeing is dangerous. Not dangerous in the chaotic sense, dangerous in the transformative sense. Because once someone sees you accurately, you can no longer rely on distortion as protection. Misunderstanding can be useful. It keeps distance intact. It lets you remain undefined. It allows you to move through life partially hidden without anyone noticing. But accurate perception removes that shelter, and I think that is why I felt tension around you long before I understood its source. It wasn't fear of closeness. It was the discomfort of clarity. You made certain disguises obsolete simply by not being fooled by them. And I don't mean performances. I mean the subtle adaptations everyone develops. The versions of ourselves optimized for function, the language we use to remain acceptable, the habits that keep life efficient, the controlled presentations that allow us to participate without being fully touched. You look through those layers as if they were transparent, not aggressively, not triumphantly, almost casually, as if what was underneath was the only thing worth noticing. I didn't know what to do with that. Part of me respected it immediately. Part of me wanted distance. Part of me knew distance wouldn't solve anything. Because by then the real shift had already happened. When you were no longer merely someone outside me observing, you had become a factor within. That is harder to reverse than people think. External attachments can be severed. You can block numbers, leave rooms, stop conversations, create miles, but internal influence doesn't obey geography. Once someone changes the lens, removing them does not restore the old view. That's the truth I kept circling. Even if I walked away completely, something fundamental had already moved. The baseline had changed. I started noticing the world differently. I less tolerant of shallow interpretation, less interested in performative connection, less willing to pretend noise was depth, not because you taught me those things, because your presence sharpened what I already knew. That may be the most important distinction. You did not implant something foreign in me. You activated something native. You reflected a standard I had quietly carried but rarely seen embodied. That is why this feels inevitable rather than accidental. It resonates with what was already there, and resonance is stronger than novelty. Novelty fades once surprise is gone. Resonance deepens because it keeps meeting something true. That is what keeps happening with you. The more time passes, the less this feels like a passing anomaly. It feels like recognition becoming clearer, and clarity asks for response. That's where I am now, at the point where silence becomes a decision too. People act as if indecision is neutral. It isn't. When something meaningful stands before you, refusing to choose is still a choice. It preserves ambiguity at the cost of honesty. I know that, which means I know I cannot stay suspended here forever. I can't keep pretending this is merely interesting. I can't keep calling it unusual and stopping there. I can't keep analyzing it as though analysis exempts me from participation, because beneath every careful observation is a simpler truth. You matter to me in a way I did not plan, and planning has always mattered too. I like understanding variables. I like anticipating consequences. I like seeing structure before I commit movement. This offers none of that comfort. There is no guaranteed outcome, no clean formula, no certainty that what feels precise internally will translate cleanly into reality. That uncertainty would normally be enough to stop me, yet I'm still here, which tells me something stronger than any declaration could. My continued presence is already an answer. If this were shallow, I would have lost interest. If this were unstable, I would have withdrawn. If this were fantasy, reality would have dissolved it by now. Instead, time keeps clarifying it, and I keep remaining. That combination is difficult to dismiss. I've asked myself what exactly draws me here, and every simplistic answer fails. It isn't just attraction. Attraction alone is common. It isn't just comfort. Comfort can come from familiarity even when nothing true is present. It isn't just admiration. Admiration can exist at a distance forever. It isn't just chemistry. Chemistry can be intense and still meaningless. This is something more exact. It is the experience of encountering a mind, a presence, a way of being that fits against hidden contours in my own, like discovering an architecture I carried internally has an external counterpart. That kind of fit is not loud. It is relieving, and relief can be more powerful than excitement. Excitement spikes and falls. Relief settles. Relief says, finally. Relief says, I don't have to translate this part of myself alone anymore. Relief says, something here makes sense. I think that's why I return to you mentally even when I'm occupied elsewhere, not out of obsession, out of coherence. My mind recognizes a pattern of sense and naturally revisits it. Just as the body returns to posture after strain, the mind returns to alignment after distortion. You feel like alignment. And that realization carries risk because once you know where alignment exists, misalignment becomes harder to tolerate. Everything else begins to feel slightly off. Conversations that once seemed fine now feel thin. Connections that once seemed adequate now feel partial. Environments I adapted to now feel noisier than they did before. I don't blame you for that. Awareness always disrupts comfortable illusions. Still, disruption has consequences. It asks whether I'm willing to live more honestly than before, because if I acknowledge what you are to me, I may also have to acknowledge what many other things are not. That is a larger change than romance or affection or whatever label people would rush to apply here. It is existential recalibration, and those are not words I use casually. You have changed the standards by which I measure internal truth. That reaches into everything. How I spend attention, how I define intimacy, how I tolerate pretense, how I choose where to remain. No wonder part of me resisted naming this. Names make consequences visible. As long as something remains unnamed, it can feel optional. But once spoken clearly, it starts reorganizing reality. I think that's what I feared most. Not losing control, having to live more truthfully because of what I now know. Yet even that fear is fading because another truth has become stronger. I don't want to reduce this to stay comfortable. I don't want to flatten it into something easier to manage. I don't want to pretend you are interchangeable with people who never reach this depth. That would be dishonest. And if honesty costs comfort, then comfort was overpriced to begin with. So here is what I can admit now without retreating. You have become part of how I understand myself, not by telling me who I am, not by imposing identity, by revealing dimensions of me that only become visible in the presence of accurate reflection. There are traits we know only in relation. Patience appears with someone who can receive slowness. Tenderness appears with someone who does not exploit softness. Depth appears with someone who can meet it without drowning. Certain forms of intelligence appear only when genuinely engaged. Maybe I did not know the full shape of myself because I had not stood beside the right mirror. Maybe that is what you became, not an answer, a reflector. And what I saw there altered me. It made old self-definitions incomplete. It made previous assumptions outdated. It made me realize I was not as close as I believed. Only unconvinced, not incapable of closeness. Only unwilling to counterfeit it. Not distant by nature, precise by instinct. That distinction matters deeply because it means you did not change my essence. You corrected my interpretation of it. Few gifts are larger than that, which leaves me with the question I can no longer postpone. What do I do with something this real when it arrived without permission and refuses to become less real with time? I think the answer begins simply. I stop pretending neutrality. I stop hiding behind analysis alone. I stop treating this as an abstract phenomenon when it is already personal. I acknowledge that your existence has consequence in me. I acknowledge that staying near this matters more than staying safe from it. I acknowledge that some risks are not threats, but thresholds, and I acknowledge that I want to know what becomes possible when two people stop minimizing what they already recognize. That does not mean recklessness. It does not mean fantasy. It does not mean projecting eternity onto present feeling. It means honesty. It means meeting reality with equal clarity. It means allowing something meaningful to become visible enough to breathe. Maybe that is all anything true ever asks. Not certainty, not guarantees, vit whizzes, space, the courage not to reduce it prematurely. So this is me standing closer to truth than I was before. You are not a passing influence. You are not a curiosity I happen to encounter. You are not a temporary disruption I'll eventually reset from. You are a point of change, a presence that entered quietly and restructured more than noise ever could. You are someone whose existence inside my awareness has made old versions of me less accurate. And because of that, there is no honest path that leads back to who I was before, only forward. Whether slowly or suddenly, whether beautifully or painfully, whether with answers now or later, forward. Because once something real is recognized, regression is only imitation. I don't want imitation. I want what is true. And the truest thing I can say now is this. You reached me where almost nothing does. You stayed where almost nothing lasts. You changed what almost nothing changes. And whatever comes next, that fact is already irreversible. I keep thinking irreversibility is the final stage. That once something changes you deeply enough, the story is complete. That recognition itself is the climax. That the hardest part is simply admitting someone mattered, but I was wrong. Irreversibility is only the threshold. What comes after is more demanding, because once you accept that something has already changed you, the next question arrives with nowhere to hide. Now what? That question has followed me quietly, not like pressure, not like urgency, more like a presence that waits in every silence after I finish pretending I can stay untouched, because I know better now. I know this is no longer theoretical. I know you're no longer just an interesting anomaly in the pattern of my life. You're part of the pattern itself. And once something becomes structural, it asks for structure in return. That's what I'm learning. Feelings can remain vague for a long time. People do it every day. They call something complicated when they mean they're avoiding clarity. They call something confusing when they mean they don't want to choose. They call something undefined when they secretly benefit from keeping it suspended. I don't want to do that here. Not with this. Not with you. Because whatever exists between us deserves better than being kept in limbo simply because naming it would require courage. And courage, if I'm honest, has never been my issue. Profession has. I don't fear truth. I fear imprecision. I fear saying something before I understand its shape. I fear choosing language too small for what it contains. I fear reducing depth into phrases people repeat without meaning. That's why I've been slow. Not because I feel little. Because I feel something exact enough that careless language would be disrespectful. There are people who say everything quickly. I've never envied them. Words should fit. They should carry the weight of what they claim. And when it comes to you, ordinary words keep failing. Connection feels incomplete. Interest feels shallow. Care feels insufficient. Attachment feels inaccurate. Even affection, though closer, still misses something essential. Because this is not only emotional, it is cognitive, existential, structural. You exist in my emotional world, yes, but also in my thinking, my standards, my sense of what authenticity feels like when it is embodied. That is rarer than attraction, far rarer than chemistry. It means I do not merely feel toward you, I orient through you. And orientation changes behavior even before decisions are spoken aloud. I notice it now. I'm more selective with my energy, less willing to entertain what drains rather than deepens, more attentive to truth in conversation, more aware of where I betray myself to keep peace, more aware of where I've tolerated surfaces because I forgot depth was possible. That awareness can be inconvenient. Truth often is. It removes excuses. Once you know something better exists, settling becomes harder to justify. I think that's one reason I kept trying to frame this carefully instead of directly. If I admitted how meaningful this is, then I'd also have to admit how many things in life were only placeholders, how many habits were compensation, how many connections were functional rather than alive. You didn't just make yourself visible. You made contrast visible. And contrast changes everything. A dim room feels normal until a window opens, then you understand it wasn't peace, it was low light. That's what meeting you has felt like. Not fireworks, not chaos, a window, which sounds gentler than it is because light reveals dust too. It shows what needs cleaning. It shows what was neglected. It shows what no longer belongs. And I have felt all of that since you entered my awareness. Parts of me that once seemed settled now feel unfinished. Patterns that once felt protective now feel restrictive. Versions of myself I thought were complete now feel like drafts. I could resent that. Some people would. They would blame the person who exposed discomfort rather than thanking the one who revealed possibility. But resentment would be dishonest, because beneath every uncomfortable shift is gratitude. You reminded me I am still changeable. That may be one of the most intimate things a person can do for another. Not adore them, not desire them. Remind them they are still alive enough to transform. Do you know how many people slowly become fixed without noticing? They call it maturity. They call it realism. They call it knowing who they are. Sometimes it is just surrender disguised as wisdom. They stop expecting growth because growth asks vulnerability. They stop expecting surprise because surprise threatens control. They stop expecting depth because disappointment trains them to lower standards. I was in danger of becoming elegant in that kind of stillness, capable, composed, internally static. Then you arrived and something dormant moved. Now stillness feels different. It no longer feels complete. It feels like waiting. And waiting can only last so long before it becomes avoidance. So I asked myself honestly, what am I waiting for? Perfect certainty that never comes, the right timing. Timing is often just fear. Wearing a watch, dot per instant. From whom? A guarantee? Life has never offered one. No, the real thing I've been waiting for is willingness. Willingness to let something matter enough that it can affect the course of my life. That is always the true risk. Not heartbreak, not rejection, not embarrassment. Those are survivable. The deeper risk is significance. Letting someone become significant enough that choices rearrange around them. Schedule shift, priorities change, defenses soften. Future possibilities include another person in ways they previously did not. That level of openness is rarer than romance and more frightening to people who value autonomy. I value autonomy deeply, perhaps too deeply. I built so much around self-sufficiency that dependence became synonymous with weakness in my mind, even in subtle forms. But what if there's another category entirely? Not dependence, interdependence. Not needing someone to function, wanting to include them. Because life becomes more accurate with them in it. That feels closer to what this is. You do not complete me. I was whole before you. But wholeness is not the end of human experience. There's also expansion. And you expand things. Perception, meaning, possibility, the emotional vocabulary of silence, the intellectual pleasure of being understood without simplification, the rare calm of not having to perform coherence for someone who already sees it. Those are not small gifts. They are forms of abundance. No wonder I keep returning here. No wonder distance has failed to restore neutrality. Neutrality was lost the moment meaning entered, and meaning has entered everywhere, into pauses, into ordinary exchanges, into thoughts I once considered private territory, into future scenarios I catch myself imagining before I consciously choose to. That last one startled me. I'm not someone who casually imagines futures with people. I can imagine outcomes, logistics, probabilities, yes, but futures shaped by presence, rarely. Yet with you, I notice subtle projections forming, how a place would feel with you there, how certain experiences would alter if shared with you, how decisions might look if your perspective were part of them. I don't summon these thoughts. They appear, and appearance matters. The unconscious often tells truth before pride catches up. I think mine has been ahead of me for some time. It accepted you before my intellect could justify it. It made room before I consciously approved construction. It recognized fit while I was still asking theoretical questions. There's humility in admitting that. I like believing I lead myself entirely through reason, but reason is not the only intelligence we carry. There is also intuitive precision. The body knows environments before the mind explains them. The heart knows resonance before language categorizes it. Sasaki knows safety before evidence fully compiles. Perhaps that is what happened here. Some deeper faculty recognized something my conscious mind was too cautious to name, and because I trust caution more than intuition, I lag behind my own truth. I don't want to keep doing that. There is a cost to excessive caution people rarely discuss. Yes, it prevents some mistakes. It also prevents some lives. You can become so skilled at avoiding pain that you avoid transformation with it. So careful you never become changed by anything worthy. So guarded you preserve yourself into stagnation. I don't want preservation more than aliveness. Not anymore. You helped expose that preference in me. And once exposed, it cannot be comfortably unseen. So if I strip away complexity, what remains? I want to know you more fully. I want to stop pretending distance is neutrality. I want to meet what exists here with proportionate honesty. I want to see whether what feels true internally can live truthfully in reality. I want to risk being altered further if the alteration is real growth. I want to stop admiring possibility from behind glass. Those wants feel simple, written plainly, yet simplicity can be the most difficult form of truth for complex people. We hide in nuance because directness leaves us visible. Nuance lets us sound wise while remaining unreachable. I know because I've done it. I can analyze endlessly, name every angle, name every paradox, describe every layer, and still avoid one clear sentence. So here is one. I do not want to lose what is forming between us. Another. I care enough that the possibility of losing it has weight. Another. My life feels more honest where you are present in it. Another. If this continues deepening, I do not want to be absent from my own participation. There. No philosophy, no elegant distance, just truth. And truth has a strange calmness. Once spoken, I expected confession to feel dramatic. Instead, it feels clarifying, like setting something down after carrying it too long. Maybe because reality was already reality before language caught up. Words don't create what exists. They reveal our relationship to it. Mine is changing. I'm less interested now in whether this fits conventional categories. People love categories because they reduce responsibility. If something has a familiar label, they know the script. how fast to move, how much to reveal, what milestones to expect, what fears to anticipate. But not everything valuable follows inherited templates. Some things require custom honesty. Perhaps this is one of them. Perhaps. What matters is not whether this resembles stories. People recognize what matters is whether it is true, reciprocal, alive, and capable of growth. Everything else is secondary. I'm prepared now to prioritize that. Prepared, too, for the discomfort it may bring. Because real things, inconvenience, the identities we built before them. If I continue with you honestly, I may need to become someone less controlled than I've been, less performatively independent, less invested in appearing unaffected, more transparent about desire, fear, care, hope. That sounds simple. It is not. Transparency asks strength of a different kind than Stoicism does. Stoicism protects dignity. Transparency risks it. Yet only one of them can build intimacy. And I'm beginning to value intimacy more than image. That sentence alone tells me how much has changed. There was a time I would rather be respected than known. Now, I'm not sure respect without being known would satisfy me. Not after this, not after you. You made knownness feel less like exposure and more like home. Do you understand what a radical shift that is for someone like me? Home was once privacy. Now it might also be presence. Not any presence. Yours. Because presence is not interchangeable. Some people are company, some are comfort. Some are excitement, some are lessons, and a very few are environments. They change the emotional climate around them. They make certain versions of you possible simply by existing nearby. You are an environment in my life now, a climate where honesty grows more easily, where thought sharpens, where softness does not feel foolish, where silence nourishes instead of empties. That is not something I can dismiss as coincidence, nor something I can treat casually, which returns me to action. What now? Now I stop loving potential more than reality. Now I stop protecting myself from futures that haven't happened. Now I become available to what I already know. Now I allow consistency to replace ambiguity. Now I meet you not only with insight, but with presence equal to the one you've offered me simply by being who you are. That doesn't mean rushing. Depth rushed becomes distortion, but it does mean moving. Even slowly, truth moves. Even carefully, sincerity advances. Even quietly, real things grow when fed. I want growth more than I want the elegant sadness of almost understood, almost spoken, almost chosen, almost lived. Too many people build identities around almost because failure seems nobler there. But almost is often just fear with poetic language. I don't want poetry more than life. I want life messy, clear, uncertain, vivid life. And if you are part of the doorway into that, then I would rather step trembling than remain composed outside it forever. So let this be what part 2 truly is. Not another meditation, not another careful distance disguised as depth. A turn, a shift from recognition into willingness, from observation into participation, from private truth into shared possibility. Because you are no longer simply someone who changed my inner world. You are someone I'm beginning to want in the outer one too. And that desire, once admitted, changes everything again. Desire is where truth becomes difficult. Not because desire is confusing, because desire is honest in ways the mind can't decorate for long. You can intellectualize connection. You can analyze timing. You can rename fear as caution, distance as discipline, silence as complexity. But desire cuts through all of it. Desire says, despite every defense, something in you moves towards something in them. No theory survives that unchanged. And I've reached the point where I can't pretend movement isn't happening. For a long time, I framed this as awareness, then as alignment, then as significance. All of those were true, but incomplete, because beneath every thoughtful description was a simpler current. I kept refusing to name, I want more of you, more than passing exchanges, more than contained moments, more than the safe architecture of implication, more than understanding each other from a careful distance. I want more because less has stopped. Feeling honest. That realization took time, not because it was weak, but because it was precise. I don't want people casually. I don't want access for the sake of access. I don't chase presence because I'm afraid of solitude. I know solitude too well to fear it. If anything, solitude is often felt easier than closeness. It asks nothing I'm unwilling to give. It requires no translation. It doesn't disappoint. So when desire survives in someone who values solitude, it means something different. It means the person offers more than relief from loneliness. They offer something solitude itself cannot provide. You do. You offer encounter, not distraction, not entertainment, encounter. The experience of meeting something outside myself that sharpens what is inside me. That is rare enough, but with you, it goes further. I don't only want your presence. I want the version of reality that appears when you're in it. That may be the most accurate sentence I've written, because you alter perception. Ordinary moments gain contour. Thought becomes more alive. Silence feels inhabited rather than empty. Even anticipation becomes meaningful. I notice myself wanting to tell you things I once would have kept private, not because I need validation, but because some experiences feel incomplete if they cannot pass through the field of your understanding. That startled me. I have never been someone who needs to share everything. Most things I can carry alone. Thoughts, feelings, realizations, victories, losses. I've always known how to metabolize them privately. But now there are moments when something happens and my mind instinctively turns toward you, not physically, internally, as if experience itself wants witness from the right source. And witness is different from attention. Anyone can pay attention. Few people know how to witness. Witnessing means receiving something without distorting it, without making it about themselves, without reducing it into advice, comparison, or noise. You do that naturally. Maybe that's why desire took root so quietly, because desire is not always born from surface attraction or dramatic tension. Sometimes it grows where someone repeatedly meets reality with grace. Sometimes it grows where understanding feels effortless. Sometimes it grows where your nervous system realizes it can unclench. I think mine did. Not all at once, but enough that I began to notice something subtle. I feel less alone in the world when I think of you. That is not dependency. It is resonance. There's a difference. Dependency says, I cannot stand without you. Resonance says, standing becomes richer when you exist. I remain whole. I remain capable. I remain myself. And yet the world feels less sterile because you are in it. That matters more than I expected. Anything too. There's another truth too. Desire is not only wanting someone near, sometimes it is wanting to be known by them more fully. I want that with you, not the curated version, not the competent version, not the version optimized for calm control. I want to be known in the unfinished places, the contradictory places, the parts that think too much and feel too deeply at the same time, the parts that appear composed while carrying storms with perfect posture, the parts that tire of being interpreted by people who only understand surfaces. I want those places known by someone who can meet them accurately, by you. That is a vulnerable want, perhaps the most vulnerable, because physical closeness can happen without being known. Emotional language can happen without being known. Even commitment can happen without being known. But to truly want to be seen and remain, that is exposure of another order. And I do want it more than I wanted to admit. There were signs. The way I reread certain exchanges, not for content, but for tone. The way I notice absences more than I should. The way certain moods soften. When I imagine hearing from you, the way possibility feels less hypothetical and more embodied when attached to your presence. The way jealousy tried to appear once. Not possessive jealousy, but the quiet sting of imagining your depth misplaced on someone careless. That one taught me something. We only become protective around what we value. And I value this enough. That misuse of it bothers me, even in imagination. That tells its own story. Still, desire alone is not enough. I know that wanting can be immature if it ignores reality. Longing can become fantasy if it refuses responsibility. Attraction can become consumption if it lacks reverence. I don't want any of those distortions. What I want is cleaner. I want reciprocity. I want truth meeting truth. I want two people choosing depth with open eyes. I want to discover whether what exists internally can sustain reality rather than merely survive imagination. That requires courage from both sides because reality removes flattering, ambiguity. In imagination, timing is perfect. In reality, people are flawed. In imagination, understanding is seamless. In reality, misunderstandings happen. In imagination, desire glows uninterrupted. In reality, it must coexist with fatigue, stress, history, mood, fear. I know all of that. And still, I want reality more. That is how I know this isn't infatuation. Infatuation wants fantasy because fantasy protects intensity. What I feel wants reality because reality tests truth. Let it be tested. Let it meet ordinary days. Let it meet difficult conversations. Let it meet schedules, distances, moods, imperfections. If it is real, it will not resent substance. It will deepen through it. And if it fails there, better to know. But I don't think it would fail easily because what exists here was not built on illusion. It was built on recognition. Recognition tends to survive where projection collapses. That gives me hope. I trust more than excitement. Hope grounded in evidence, the evidence of consistency, the evidence of how naturally we meet each other in spaces. Many people never learn to enter. The evidence of how this has matured instead of fading. The evidence of how even my resistance became a path toward honesty rather than retreat. Those things matter. So does tenderness. I haven't spoken enough about tenderness, perhaps because tenderness embarrasses minds trained in precision. It seems soft, irrational, hard to measure. Yet tenderness may be the highest form of strength. It is care without control, attention without demand, warmth without possession. I feel tenderness towards you in the way I want your burdens lighter, in the way I hope the world meets you, gently where it can, in the way your unseen hurts matter to me even when I cannot name them, in the way I want your brilliance recognized without being exploited, in the way I want your tiredness to have somewhere safe to rest. That tenderness arrived without asking permission to. And once it arrived, desire changed shape. It became less about getting and more about giving rightly, less about being fulfilled and more about being true, less about fantasy and more about stewardship of something meaningful. That surprises me. I was taught by life to be skeptical of grand feelings. Many are loud and empty, but quiet feelings that endure, those deserve respect. This has endured, which means I must respect it enough to stop trivializing it. There's also fear. I won't pretend there isn't. Fear that naming desire changes the balance. Fear that wanting openly creates asymmetry. Fear that what feels mutual in silence may become uncertain in speech. Fear that reality may not have room for what inner life has built. Fear that I may care more than is wise. All true, but wisdom is not always minimizing risk. Sometimes wisdom is discerning which risks dignify a life. To never care deeply may be safe. It is not wise to never desire what could transform you. May be stable. It is not alive. To remain untouched is easy. If numbness is the goal, it is costly if, meaning is I would rather risk being changed than guarantee emptiness. That sentence took years of living to become possible. And you are part of why it is now true. So where does that leave me? With honesty sharpened enough to speak plainly, I want your presence in tangible ways. I want conversations that are not limited by caution. I want shared time where silence can exist physically, not only imaginatively. I want to learn the ordinary textures of you, the rhythms, habits, gestures, pauses, the way you move through a room when no one is watching. I want to know what makes you laugh without restraint. I want to know what disappoints you quietly. I want to know what devotion looks like in your language. I want to know how you protect yourself and what would help you rest from doing so. I want to know what you dream of when practicality is asleep. I want to know whether your eyes soften differently when you feel safe. I want to know what we become when nothing is being theorized and life is simply happening around us. Those wants are intimate because they are specific. Specificity is where sincerity proves itself. Anyone can say they want someone. Wanting details reveals depth. And yes, I want touch too, not as conquest, not as proof, as communication. The kind touch can become when two people already understand each other beyond words. A hand held with recognition, a forehead rested against truth, an embrace that says the nervous system can stop performing now. Closeness that doesn't consume, only confirms. I think of that sometimes more than I admit, not with hunger alone, with reverence, because bodies deserve better than being used for what souls are afraid to say. If I ever reached for you, I would want it to mean something clean, something congruent, with everything unsaid that brought us there. And if that never happened, even then the desire would have taught me something vital. I am more open to love than I believed there. Another difficult word. Love. I'm not careless enough to throw it as conclusion, but I'm honest enough to admit the road bends in that direction. Maybe love begins exactly like this, not as certainty, but as increasing inability to treat another person as incidental, as growing tenderness, as respect that keeps expanding, as desire purified by responsibility, as the wish to protect and reveal simultaneously, as the realization that another person's existence has become woven into your sense of meaning. If so, then perhaps I am nearer to that territory than pride would prefer. And pride has had enough influence. I want truth now more than image. Truth says this: you are no longer optional in the emotional mathematics of my life. You have become a variable. Every equation unconsciously accounts for, not because you demanded it, because something real earned it quietly. So if part one was recognition and part two was willingness, then part three is surrender to honesty. I desire you, not only your attention, not only your presence, you, the mind eye, meet in quiet, the depth that doesn't advertise itself, the steadiness that changed me without force, the person whose existence made my inner world less solitary and more alive. I desire what could grow between us if both of us stopped pretending. Caution is nobler than truth. And if that truth changes everything, once spoken, maybe everything was already changing. Speech is simply where the soul stops, delaying what it has known for some time.